On today's episode, we're loaded and ready to go. We got lots of OpenBSD news, a look at LetsEncrypt usage, and the NetBSD scheduler, oh my, and much more. Keep it tuned to your place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 169, Scheduling Your NetBSD, recorded November 23rd, 2016. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us this week. We got an exciting episode, a lot of good stories to talk about. Of course, for those of us here in the U.S., Thanksgiving's tomorrow, actually, the day after we record this. So I'm getting the season started early with my ugly Christmas sweater, which, yes, it is two gingerbread men with lightsabers. In case you can't see that, I thought I'd point that out. But
I just have the BSD Now logo on a plain shirt.
Alan's going all traditional with us, right? I had to do something fun. Yes. The holiday season's starting here, and I was telling Alan before the show, we got to find...
Settle down.
Oh, well... Shoot, you wouldn't know it looking at the stores. Like, even town's got all the decorations up and stuff out here. It's nuts. But we got to find Alan an ugly
snowed here yet.
Christmas sweater. You haven't even had snow yet? Oh. It's gotten cold here, but no snow yet. But
yes, there was frost last night.
Okay. All right, well, cool. Well, it's going to be an exciting holiday season. There's a lot happening. We got a lot to talk about, so we should hop right into it here. So let's get into our headlines. First up, we have Ted Eubanks gives us a new article. Actually, we have another one by him later, too. So let you take this one, Alan. I think I got the second one.
So Ted brings us this piece he calls Production Ready, and he tells the story of a project he worked on where they picked a framework because it was marketed as being and turned out not so much. So they look at this framework and they're like, okay, we'll test a bunch of our workload on it and see how it does. So they tested time zones. They set East Coast and West Coast of the U.S. and it dealt with it all and it was fine. And they was like, okay, we need Unicode support. So they tried stuff in English and various European languages and it all worked. And then they're like, we need it to send emails. So they had it send some emails and they all arrived just fine. The framework said it was production ready on the tin, and it passed all the tests they did. So what's the worst that could happen?
Sure.
So see, now we built our product on top of this. Some of the bugs were caught internally. Others were discovered by customers who were, of course, a little dismayed. Like, how could you possibly ship this? Indeed, we were doing testing quite a bit, really, but when every possible edge case has a bug, it's hard to find them all. So a customer of theirs was in Arizona, which does not observe daylight savings time. And that crashed the app.
Oh, just crashed it.
Apparently.
Didn't even...
So it understood DST just fine. What it didn't understand is someplace that does not observe DST.
Okay.
It's like, but we're in DST time, and you want to use not DST? How's that work? I don't know, apparently
that's not possible.
And they use some less common Unicode characters. I think some of the ones that are more than 2 bytes and are actually like 3 bytes or something. I think maybe some Japanese characters or something. Buffer overflow. Whoops.
Nice.
Or the email system. Turns out the way the SMTP protocol works for sending email, the way you indicate the end of an email is a dot on a blank line. Well, it's perfectly valid to send an email with a dot on a blank line. And then more email after it. But if their application doesn't escape it properly to say, this is an actual dot, not me saying that's the end of the email, means that the second half of the email never gets delivered, right? Only you send half of an email. It's like,
nice.
Whoops. Or then he found, egregious performance problems because of a naive n-squared algorithm for growing a buffer. It's like, whoops. Or it's like, oh, it works on all the different platforms. That's great. It's like, oh, we found that on some platforms, the performance is terrible because it uses the wrong threading primitives.
Sure.
Or like, we had bizarre database connection bugs for some queries that he still hasn't figured out why it does that. He says, in short, everything works for me quality, but is that really production ready? There are some obvious contenders for the title for today's most production-ready software, but it's more of a general phenomenon. People who have success don't know that what they don't know and what they didn't test. And they also don't know that unused features will probably crash and burn.
So it sounds to me like they need to come up with like a new term. Instead of production ready, it should be like production active, because it almost sounds like this was like, we tested it internally, we think it's good, but it's not actually being used anywhere.
Well, I think
until Ted's company used it and found all the little things, like,
or
obviously nobody in Arizona's run this.
Yeah, or people were running it, but nobody tried running it on ARM or some platform other than x86, or nobody happened to ever have sent an email with a dot on a blank line. It's not that common of a thing you would do, but
But it happens.
It will bite you, and then it'll be obvious what happened after the fact. But before
what if somebody sends those emails where you put the dots, like you have to scroll down to read the message at the bottom? Oh man, that's maybe we need disqualifiers or disclaimers, with production ready asterisks. These are the things we've actually tested in production with.
Yeah, he says, previous to making our big bet, there was a validation prototype. It was a success. Everything seemed to work, even all the functionality we needed to use. But the validation didn't use production scale data. Like he says, they tested with East Coast and West Coast time zones, but not Arizona time. An email was sent, but not one consisting of dot, and so on. Or we tried it on ARM and it worked fine. We didn't really run it hard enough to notice that it was super slow on ARM.
Sure. Did you see what product they were rolling it into?
No, he didn't talk about that.
Just
I don't actually know where Ted Yu works for his day job.
Okay. Very cool. Well, that's a good caution to all of us developers out there. Be careful when you use the term production ready.
Well, there's a bunch of software here we use in production that work fine for us, but it wouldn't work for anybody else.
That's right. Okay, well, moving on here. So we have using LetsEncrypt within FreeBSD. Now, we've talked a lot about LetsEncrypt over the past year now at this point, and there's a lot of good information starting to come out here. So what's the newest one we have?
Well, so this one's actually switching FreeBSD.org like cluster infrastructure over to using it, which proposes a couple of more complicated things than most of the regular LetsEncrypt clients are ready to deal with. Similar to when we discovered some of the shortcomings of most of the clients when we wanted to do something for the TrueOS repo. In that case, it was, well, we can't just put the file there because we need like 15 minutes for it to replicate. Although I figured out a way around that now that I thought about it more, but didn't really help.
Okay. Well, next time.
But the bigger problem is that the place where we store the keys for the TrueOS repo is not the place where you put the files.
Okay.
Right. So, if you ran the LetsEncrypt client on the keys jail that we gave you, it wouldn't have access to write to the file system where the packages live or whatever, which is on a completely different machine in a different data center.
Sure.
And a bunch of things of that nature. But anyway, so the FreeBSD cluster has even more complicated requirements, and so they talk about it a little bit here. So they say, so Peter Wem wrote this article saying he decided to give LetsEncrypt certificates a shot on his personal web server earlier this year after a disaster with Start SSL, and he's going to share what he learned, and then he talks about transitioning over to making the FreeBSD cluster use it. He says, the biggest gotcha that people tend to develop are bad habits when they only have to deal with certificates like once a year or so. I more than once have bought certificates for 2 years just so I wouldn't have to deal with it for an extra year, right? Sometimes there's a discount for that. But LetsEncrypt certificates are only good for 90 days. So if you have to think about it, a lot more frequently, you're going to automate it instead of doing it manually just once a year, right?
That's true. And I'm victim of that as well. Like I've done it 4 years now, and it's every time it was different until this last year I switched to LetsEncrypt, and now I've had to do it like 3 times.
So
since then, so
the very beginning of LetsEncrypt is still kind of manual, making your user key and so on. But after that, it's just a cron job, and you don't have to think about it ever again. Until they change
so the big gotcha for me was I had a lot of sites that would redirect automatically HTTP over to HTTPS, which would screw up the Acme client verification because it's like, I can't pull that over HTTPS. So, putting in some exceptions where it's like, no, this directory can be served over HTTP. And that was the workaround that we came up with.
Basically, my solution for TrueOS is actually to tell the Nginx, don't serve that directory locally, proxy it back to the master server for the .well-known directory or whatever. so that we can solve that.
Yep.
But yeah, so Peter says, that all changes with LetsEncrypt certificates. Instead of 1 to 5 year lifetimes, LetsEncrypt certificates are only valid for 90 days. Most people will want to renew their certificates every 60 to 90 days. That's not something you're going to want to do manually.
Sure.
Says the person who has to do it manually for BSD Now until I sort something out. This forces the issue. You really need to automate it and make it robust. So LetsEncrypt folks provide tools to do this for most of your common cases. You run it on the actual machine. It manages the certificates and adjusts the server configuration files for you. Their goal is to provide a baseline shake and bake solution. I was not willing to give that level of control to a third-party tool on his own servers, let alone, he says, is absolutely out of the question for the FreeBSD.org cluster.
Sure.
He says, I should probably mention that we do things on the FreeBSD.org cluster that many people would find a bit strange. The biggest problem that we deal with is with the traditional model of a firewall/bastion between us and them doesn't really apply here. We design for the assumption that hostile users are already on the inside of the network. The cluster is spread over 8 distinct sites with naked internet and no VPN between them. There's actually very little trust between the systems on this network. So, SSH is for people only. There are no headless users that can SSH. Which is
no sudo either.
Yep. There's no passwords. Everything is done with keys for SSH. There's no sudo. And the command and control systems use signing for trust rather than trusting IP addresses. It says we don't trust anything by IPv4 or IPv6 address because we assume that man in the middle is a thing. And so on. In general, things are constructed to be trigger, poll, or pull based instead.
Sure.
So, each of the edge servers pulls stuff down into it when it's triggered rather than, a central server pushing stuff out or something. Because if that central server were compromised, it could then push out bad stuff. Or basically, it could provide a tunnel into all these machines because you would all have to let it log in. He says, the downside is that this makes automation and integration of LetsEncrypt's clients interesting. If server configuration files can't be modified and replicated web infrastructure is literally read-only, the DNS zone files are static and headless users can't SSH and therefore cannot do commits, how do you do the verification tokens in an automated fashion?
That's a challenge.
Yeah, in the FreeBSD cluster, the configuration files for things like Nginx are stored in SVN and are always just pulled out of SVN and never modified locally. If you do modify them locally, they'll just be reverted and it'll pull out of SVN every 10 minutes or something. So he says, yes, interesting indeed. So we wanted to be able to use certificates for things like LDAP and SMTP servers where there is no web interface. Right, so you can't do the regular HTTP file verification for those because LDAP.freebsd.org doesn't run a web server.
Sure.
So we had to use DNS validation for domains. That was what I wanted to do with the TrueOS. We just couldn't find a client that did it at the time, but he managed to find one, acme.sh.
Interesting. Okay.
It says so. First, they generate the signing request, and that's they give you the Acme challenge. And then they put that in a directory, which is nullfs mounted into a different jail, which then uses that information to reconstruct the zone file. So in the certbot home directory, there's an extra thing called DNS extra. And when you do the Acme client on a new domain, it creates a new file in there containing the one line that's the TXT record for that domain with the Acme challenge data.
Okay. Interesting.
And then, it's not the actual script, but a simplified version. On the DNS server, it cats DNS extra /start@freebsd.org, filters it so it only does text records, and then adds that to basically the zone file, which cats the SOA record from the top of the zone, all of the primary data for the zone file, then all the extra stuff from all the LetsEncrypt clients or whatever, and creates a new zone under unsigned called freebsd.org. So now we have this new zone that's the SOA record, all the static DNS records, and then all these auto-generated records. And then that gets signed with DNSSEC and pushed off into all the slave servers. And then eventually, once after we've given it a couple minutes for that to all sync, then we do the next part of the Let's Encrypt system where you say, hey, Let's Encrypt, you can look up that DNS record now and verify that I control the domain. That happens, and then Let's Encrypt actually issues a certificate. Then he also provides a script for actually doing TLSA, where you publish the fingerprint of your SSL certificate in DNS, which is signed with DNSSEC, and basically it's a way to do certificate pinning. So the browser can check and be like, oh, look, that's definitely the certificate that FreeBSD is using, so that if some rogue certificate authority were to issue a fake certificate for FreeBSD.org, when the browser checked it against the DNS record, it would not match.
Sure.
It would say, hey, that's bogus.
It would detect that. Mm-hmm. That's cool.
So they export the full chain files from the certbot jail to the publishing location. There's actually another jail that can read the full chain certificates via nullfs, and they are published along with the other non-secret update mechanism. And then the actual keys that, not the private key for the SSL certificate, but the private key for Let's Encrypt that allows you to renew without having to do the DNS thing every time, that never leaves that one jail. It doesn't get distributed anywhere.
Okay.
Yeah, and he says, since we're using DNSSEC, it's a good opportunity to do TLSA. The catch with TLSA record updates is managing the update event horizon. You're supposed to have both fingerprints listed across your update cycle, right? Because you need to have the old certificate still needs to be trusted because you haven't switched the web server yet, but you can't switch the web server until the new fingerprint is in DNS. Otherwise, it won't be trusted.
Sure.
So for a while, you have to list both. So they kind of work around that by using TLSA records of type 1 instead of type 0, because type 1 changes only when you change the private key, not every 60 days when they renew the certificate.
Oh, okay.
So type 0 changes every time you renew the certificate. It's the hash of the whole certificate, whereas type 1 only changes when you change the private key. And so because they keep the same private key for a longer period of time, like a year or something,
X number of years,
it's not as bad.
Okay, that's not bad.
Then he learned some other things. So it's like when you do Nginx reload, you expect that it will read your SSL certificates, right?
Not so much.
It's like, yeah. So he says, So you do service Nginx reload, and what happens? If you said it reloads the certificate, you would be dead wrong. The majority of TLS and SSL servers require a full restart to reload the certificate if the file name is unchanged. I found this out the hard way.
So what are they doing? Just changing the file name slightly each time?
No, they're just doing an actual restart instead of
doing a full restart of it. Okay.
It was interesting. I hadn't ever run into that because out of I guess bad habit or whatever, I always name my certificate with the year as the start of the file name. So it'd be like 2016-scaleengine.com.
Yeah, that's what I did too. I put a date and time stamp on it somewhere.
Yeah, well, I always did that just because it was easier to, I didn't want to overwrite the old certificate until I knew the new one worked and everying.
Correct.
And so I just have, certificates going back to like 2010 sitting in a directory somewhere. I should probably clean those up. And so I had just never run into this before, but he did. And so he says, if you did something creative, like giving the certificate file names a timestamp, it generally does reload properly. But in the FreeBSD.org cluster, the files and hence certificate path names are static. And so that means they have to restart once every 60 days.
Yeah, that's annoying. Yeah, I haven't run into that either. I've always done it the same way as you, where I keep the old ones around just in case I screw up the switch over, so I can set it aside, go back to the old cert until I have time to
exactly. And so it's all working, and then you switch to LetsEncrypt, and all of a sudden it's using an old certificate. It's like, what's going on here?
Right. Oh man.
So then he's got some example scripts on how to do this for Postfix, Nginx, NGHTTPX, LDAP, and Apache, because they all suffer the same problem.
Nice. Okay, well, good stuff. Thank you, Peter, for writing that up. That's I hope that'll come in helpful to a lot of other sysadmins out there who've been struggling with a lot of the same problems.
Yep. He also talks about how they distribute the private keys because they don't push those through SVN, obviously, and a couple of other things of that nature.
It's neat that they could use jails and do the null FS mounts and stuff. You see, if you had to do that in VMs, like how that would be a little bit harder.
Yeah. So. the FreeBSD cluster admin team really loves jails, and so do I. Like some of my servers now have more than one screen full of jails. It's just so nice to compartmentalize everything, and then it's like, oh, I need to move that to a different machine. It's like stop jail, or snapshot, replicate, snapshot, replicate again, with just incremental. Then stop jail, snapshot, replicate again, which only takes a couple seconds. Start jail on the other side, boom, it's done.
Yeah, it's so much easier to do. It's good stuff.
Yes, jails are amazing.
Okay, well, we, as promised, if you heard the title of the episode, we're going to talk about the NetBSD scheduler here in just a second. But first, our first advertiser for the week, we got to mention, of course, DigitalOcean. The website for that, DigitalOcean.com. Nothing / just DigitalOcean.com. You can go there. Of course, when you create your account, don't forget to use the coupon code FreeBSD Now, which gives you that $10 credit. That's good for running 2 months of their cheapest VM, or if you pay for it by the hour, you can stretch that out as much as you like. Of course, DigitalOcean's been with us for a while. They came on board around the time they started offering FreeBSD natively in their service, which is cool. And since then, people have come up with ways you can install OpenNet, Dragonfly, etc. So there's a lot of really cool stuff. Even if you don't want to use their pre-rolled FreeBSD, you can roll your own.
Yeah, we had
instructions for that.
A tutorial on that a couple of weeks ago. This is
it's
great
definitely
if you want to do it all yourself instead of having a bunch of stuff they did that you don't really understand in the background.
Sure. So it's neat they offer that. But then even if you don't want to do that, say you wanted ZFS before, well, now they offer ZFS natively, so you don't even have to re-roll to get ZFS on root. So very cool. Of course, the new block storage is super convenient and cheap way to add extra storage to your box, and especially if you're using something like ZFS with it.
Speaking of jails, they now have the floating IP address feature, which allows you to have a static IP address you can move between VMs, but it's also basically a second IP address, so you can have that. So you can have jails running on your DigitalOcean VMs.
Oh, okay.
And have them have their own IPs.
That's nice. Yeah, that's handy. You can make a double use of that.
Yeah. With their hourly pricing, I've actually had the need for a rather big machine, but only for the weekend. I rented one of the bigger ones, the 8 gigs of memory, 4 cores, and 80 gigs of disk, and 5 terabytes of transfer. But at 11.9 cents an hour, and I only needed it for like 2 days. It's super cheap. It didn't cost much at all.
That's not bad.
So,
not bad at all.
I might have used 24 of them.
Do you have to do a bunch of video transcoding or something? What are you doing?
Yeah, I need to do a bunch of something. So let's just spin up 24 of these 8 gig machines and run them for the weekend and then turn them off.
That's fantastic. And of course, they make that easy. So if you had to do that a lot, you could even programmatically do that down the road. Write yourself a little script that does some rest and spins up the VMs and spins them down, and they're done. So DigitalOcean makes that all super simple. You'll want to check it out today and get signed up. And if you talk to anyone there, tell them you heard about it here on BSD Now. Okay, so as I teased, we have to talk about the NetBSD scheduler. That's not something I think we've ever discussed on this show. Or schedulers in general are just kind of scary to me. I just don't even want to pretend to understand what's going on under there. I defer to others, but somebody brave enough has taken a look at the NetBSD scheduler and has given us some details about that. So tell us what they found, Alan.
Yeah, so they were trying to run their own little application on the cloud, and they needed to run a whole bunch of them. So they spun it up. And they were like, all right, we'll fork one process or one copy of my program for each CPU so that we can maximize all the CPUs and get the work done as quickly as possible. But once they started them up, they noticed that each of the two was using about 50% of the CPU, and one of the CPUs was just idle. Yeah, so it says, today I had the need to do some number crunching using a homebrew C program. In order to do some manual load balancing, I was firing up Amazon AWS instances, which use Xen, with NetBSD 7. In this case, the system was assigned 2 CPUs. So I started 2 instances of my program with the intent that each one would use one of the CPUs, but that's not what's happening. Here's what I observed and how I fixed things for now. So he's got his 2 processes, and you see they're each using about 50% of the CPU. But when you look at the per CPU stats, you see one CPU is 100% used, and one is 100% idle.
Yeah, that's interesting.
He expected something like the CPU to be around 100% each, assuming that each process would bind to its own CPU and actually just use up all the CPU. The values I actually saw, as listed above, suggests that both programs are fighting over the same CPU.
Interesting.
So
how does he fix that?
He worked around it temporarily by using process sets. So with the PSR set command, he created a new processor set, number 1, and assigned his first process into the processor set 0, which is the default one, and assigned the second process onto CPU 1. And now, when he ran top, he saw that each of the two CPUs was 100% used, and his programs were acting like he expected.
Looks correct.
He says, things are as expected now, with each program being bound to its own CPU. Now, why didn't this happen by default is left an exercise to the reader. But he continued digging into it later. So that was the first blog post, and then he had a second one where he dug into why this might have been happening.
Sure.
And it turned out maybe there was a rounding error in the scheduler on NetBSD. So he dug into it some more, and he says, I had another look today at this and was able to reproduce the behavior using VMware Fusion with 2 CPU cores on both NetBSD 7 stable and current. So it's not specific to Zen, and it's not specific to only NetBSD 7.0. It wasn't fixed and stable, and even the current version of NetBSD has this problem. This is one hint that I got so far was from Michael Van Elst, who said that there may be a rounding error in the scheduler balance function. Looking at the code, there is not much room for a rounding error, but I'm not familiar enough at all with the code. So I cannot judge if critical bits were dropped here or how this function fits into the whole puzzle. So then in a third blog post, he goes on, pondering on the rounding error, I've set up some VMs with 4 CPUs. And the behavior shown there is that the load is distributed to about 3.5 of the CPUs. 3 CPUs are under full load, and 1 is not actually reaching 100%, but it's not idle. He says there's definitely something fishy here. So digging into it more, he says, with multiple CPUs, each CPU has a queue of processes that are either on the CPU, meaning running, which only one can be happening on each CPU, or waiting to be serviced. So they're in the queue. Those processes count as migratable in the run queue T, which is a data structure that has this queue of all the things to run. Every now and then, the system checks all of its run queues to see if a CPU is idle, and thus can steal or migrate processes from a busy CPU. Right, so there's it's like when you're at the grocery store. If there's a long queue at this checkout aisle and a new one opens up, or
you jump over.
Move over, exactly. But if you spend all your time moving around trying to find the shortest line, you might never actually get to the front of the line. Because when you move, you go to the back of that line. Right?
Sure.
So this is done by the schedule balance function. Such stealing migration has a positive effect that the processes don't have to wait to get service on the CPU it's currently waiting on. On the other side, migrating the processes has effects on the CPU's data and instruction caches. So switching CPUs shouldn't be taken too easily either. Right?
Sure.
So if he's running...
Yeah, there's a cost associated with moving your card over, right?
Well, in particular, in this one, it's if there are 8 processes that are doing this intensive math operation, if each one stays on its individual CPU, it'll grind it out max and you'll be good. But if 2 of them keep switching back and forth, you'll keep invalidating the cache and they'll have to rebuild that, and they'll actually be slower than if they had just stayed where they were. So it's important in the scheduler to also, assign a cost to this moving so that it doesn't happen unnecessarily.
Sure.
And then he also found that there's a set of sysctls you can use to control some of this. You can say, make sure that it doesn't move unless it's actually run for at least this long or waited for this long or what. A bunch of other things like that. But anyway, it also...
it sounds like he came up with a patch.
Well, he found a patch. There's... Well, when he looked, there's 2 open PRs. One of them has a patch very similar to the patch that he was gotten from... I don't know if he wrote it or got it from somebody else. But some of them, they actually just instead of multiplying by 2, they shifted one place, or instead of dividing by 2, they shifted the other direction one, which is actually the same mathematical operation. It's just written 2 different ways, and some of the variable names are different, whatever. But anyway, in the end, it's worth noting the whole issue is not Zen specific, and that they did some fixing. So then he did some testing with build.sh minus J8, which is basically compiling using 8 processes with only 4 CPU cores, and saw pretty good use of all the CPUs, although in a couple of phases of the install, like make, clean, and install, the load wasn't as distributed as you would have hoped. But the building seemed to be much better. And he summarizes saying, all in all, I'd say the patch is a good step forward from the current situation, which does not properly distribute pure CPU hogs at all. So while the patch isn't perfect, it definitely is an improvement over leaving one of your CPUs sitting idle while the other ones are while two processors are fighting over the other one.
Man, I wish I knew more about the scheduler to say like how this compares to the other BSD schedulers and whatnot. Like I'd be curious to see how much they've diverged over the years.
Yeah, I remember there was some change in like 9.1 or something about slightly lowering the probability that a process will move CPUs. Try to make it just a little bit stickier so that it'll still move if it's going to be waiting a while to get on this CPU versus just going over to the other, but don't move too often because if you keep moving, you never get your cache, right?
You spend more time just shifting the bits around.
Yeah, and then it'll get really complicated moving forward as we get into the idea of that. Oh, well, I have two separate CPU sockets, and each of those sockets has much faster access to the RAM closer to it than the other RAM. So let's try to run. It's like, oh, your process's memory is on this socket, so let's try to schedule you on a CPU on that socket, and all kinds of
it's going to get far more complicated down the road. Yeah, it's good challenges, though. We want to see those solved.
Speaking of complicated.
So what exactly is going on here with NASA and FreeBSD?
Yes, NASA is looking to build a cost-effective 100 gigabit per second firewall for their high-performance computing cluster. So they say the continuous growth of NASA's Center for Climate Simulations, or NCCS, requires providing high-performance security tools and enhancing the network capability or capacity. In order to support the requirements of the emergent services, including the Advanced Data Analytics Platform private cloud, the NCCS security team has proposed an architecture to provide extremely cost-effective 100 gigabit per second firewalls. They want to build them out of regular servers rather than try to buy something specially made that'll be much more expensive.
Just commodity hardware, sure.
So the aim of this project is to create a commodity-based platform that can process enough packets per second to sustain 100 gigabit per second workloads within the NCCS computational environment. The test domain consists of several existing systems within the NCCS, including some Dell switches, some routers, which are Dell R350s, which is a server, and some other servers that are Dell 420s or Dell C6100s. And then the hosted after their network cards are 10 gigabit Mellanox ConnectX 2s or the Intel 82599X Ethernet cards.
Sure.
So those are relatively modest 10 gigabit cards. They're a little older, but still, well supported.
Perfectly workable. Yeah.
So previous NCCS work tested the FreeBSD operating system for high-performance routing, reaching a maximum of 4 million packets per second. We can do better than that now. Building on this work, we're comparing FreeBSD 11 and FreeBSD Current along with the implementation of NetMap Forward, which is an API and also specific tuning for the 10 gigabit Ethernet cards. We used the tools iPerf3, NUT, or NUT-TCP, and NetPerf to monitor the performance of the maximum bandwidth through the cards. Additional testing has involved enabling the Common Address Redundancy Protocol, or CARP, to achieve active-active architecture. So because they need to get to 100 gigabits of firewalling, if they did active-active, half the traffic would go through one firewall and half through another, meaning they don't need to get all the way to 100 gigabits on each machine. They can, get to 100 gigabits by just spreading the load out across a couple of machines. So then they have their results. The testing has shown that the packet per second will rise with each newer version of the operating system. We established a packet per second baseline using FreeBSD 10.3 and discovered several interesting features in the packet filtering environment. First, they found that FreeBSD was able to send more packets per second as a client than CentOS 6.
Oh, good.
The choice of networking card can have a significant impact on packets per second, tuning, and netmap support. So, they're being a little more careful about which 10 gig network cards they buy now because certain ones turn out to be a lot better than others. And they say that using NetMap Forward increases the packet per second rate significantly. Tests have shown that at the optimal tuned and configured FreeBSD system, it is possible to create a system that can manage the huge amount of packet per second required to create a 100 gigabit per second firewall with commodity components.
Interesting. And now, are they still using Current for this, or are they still on,
they're still
10 or 11?
Playing with various things, deciding how to build this. But they say further tests will continue, verifying the above results with even more capable systems, including having 40 gigabit and 100 gigabit Ethernet cards. We know that Netflix is already able to send 100 gigabits of traffic out of a single socket FreeBSD server, even with encryption. But when you're talking about a firewall, you have to receive 100 gigabits per second, process it, and send it out again,
to it.
Which is a lot different than being able to just read stuff off SSDs and NVMEs and dump it into the network.
It's not a one-way barf data stream.
Yeah. But it seems reasonable to think that with some tuning and enough CPU horsepower, they would be able to do 50 gigabits per box and then active between two of them, and now you have your 100 gigabit firewall.
Sure.
They said even higher performance. In addition to hardware improvements, updates to the network capabilities in the FreeBSD current version will be closely monitored and applied as appropriate. The final result will be a reference architecture that's representative hardware and software that will enable NCCS to build, deploy, and efficiently maintain extremely cost-effective 100 gigabit per second firewalls.
That's pretty slick. Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on that. I'd be curious to see what kind of, ultimately, what their hardware looks like, and then also what kind of tuning is done. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of others very interested in that. And then we got to figure out, like, if there's anything that we can cherry pick back into FreeBSD and say, these should be the defaults if you're in this particular type of setup.
If you bought a 40 gig network card, you probably want to do this. But then maybe everybody's 40 gig workload might be slightly different.
Sure.
But, I know that Olivier from the BSD router project has a whole bunch of graphs where he's tried different, like adjusting the number of queues on the network card versus the number of CPUs available, and trying, with and without hyperthreading, a bunch of other features to watch, and basically graphing the difference, not just across versions of FreeBSD, but also across different firewalls as well, comparing, just forwarding traffic versus running IPFW versus running PF, and then, with stateful rules and without and so on. Lots of interesting stuff there. Seems like maybe we should get him going on the...
come back on here.
Yes, but we should do that. But also at the FreeBSD test class at Centex, maybe we need to set up a set of 40 or 100 gigabit machines back-to-back for him to do tests on instead of just 10 gigabit machines.
Give him a little playground of some higher-end gear for sure.
Yeah, and get those tools running so that we can start weeding out some of the obvious things and get more packets per second through.
Okay, cool.
Because obviously, like, the workload of Netflix is quite a bit different, because at that point you're just you're sending big chunks of right. It's all large packets because you're just trying to send video to people. Whereas
maybe it's time to revisit the whole, like, doing a sysctl profile or something you can apply and install, or at first boot or something like that on a FreeBSD box. Could be helpful. Okay, heading over to the news roundup, folks. We still got a few cool things to talk about, and of course, stick around for Beastie Bits and your feedback in a little bit. So let's get started at the top here. So first up, we have another jail manager that's arrived on the scene called IOCell, which is beginning life as a fork of the classic IO cage, so the shell-based IO cage, which is currently available on the port tree. So, of course, due to its shared heritage, it offers much of the same functionality and flags that IO Cage did. So if you're already an IO Cage user, you should be pretty familiar with those. But need to kind of bring you up to speed. Maybe you're not a jail user. You're like, what is this IO Cage thing or IOCell? So to give you an idea of some of the features that these two products share, I wanted to go over the list here. So, of course, it does things like templates of jails. So you can roll a template, and then you can clone those templates and make a bunch of jails out of them really quickly. It does base jails, which is the idea. For those who aren't familiar with that term, basically you would install, we'll say, FreeBSD 11.0, and that's your base. And then it would create a bunch of jails on those. The number is really up to you. But those jails would be done doing some trickery with nullfs mounts and whatnot. The idea being that they all share a common base, which is FreeBSD 11.0 in this case. So upgrading the base is as simple as just replacing that one base data set with, say, FreeBSD 11.1.
You do that, and then all your jails inherit that newer version.
Correct.
And it also
you could basically
space.
save space, and then you could just restart the jails, and oh, hey, look, they're on 11.1 now, right? So it's a neat feature that I think EasyJail came up with that first, I believe. But IOCage supports that, and then of course, then there's the idea of fully independent jails, because maybe you want to. The bad thing about base jails is you can't change certain things in the base system, so they're locked. Read only.
In my case, it's like, well, I have need for my 11 jail, but I also need a 9.3 jail. So having the option of having fully independent jails is quite useful.
Yes. Yeah, that's another thing. So if you want the jail to have its own data set where you can monkey around, or you can independently then go ahead and upgrade the base of just that one jail from within the jail, that's kind of cool. So of course, ease of use is a big thing with IOCage and now IOCell. Zero config files uses ZFS properties for everything. I think, I don't know if they ended up switching it to UCL, or they were looking at some other stuff at one point. I think it's still ZFS properties with this one.
Right. But, of course, I think that's part of the reason why this fork is IOCage is being rewritten and become quite a bit different. And it's like for some people that want to stay with how it is now, this fork will do that. Also, the author of IOCage told me at MeetBSD it was your fault that it won't be using UCL. You told him, just do JSON.
Kind of, sort of, yeah. So he had libraries. I don't want to spoil too much of what he's doing rewriting, so I won't comment too much. But there was a programmatic reason why it was easier for them to do JSON. But he can come on the show and tell us about that later at some point, and then we can argue about it live for everyone's benefit if you'd like.
Well, it seems like he and I agreed and you didn't, but you're the boss.
Yes. Which I could be convinced the other way, but I think at the moment we were more concerned about getting something written quickly and fast. And then I told him you have the option if you wanted to go change it later and switch it back to UCL or bring some UCL parser in. Yeah. Go for it. I don't really care. As long as you get it working first.
Get it working first and then deal with it. Exactly.
That's right. It was the same thing. I've done some stuff in Go recently, and it's like it has native JSON built in. So doing that first makes a lot more sense, and then I could go find a third-party thing to pull in UCL down the road. But
anyway, back to what we were actually talking about.
Yes. So some of the other stuff it supports is, of course, automatic package installation. So you can feed it a list of packages you want installed into the jails. It supports virtual networking stacks. So for those who don't know, vimage or VNet is commonly what that's referred to, and that's a feature of the FreeBSD kernel that's able to give the jail a full network stack. So it looks like it has its own NIC, and you can give it its own IP addresses. That's how you do certain things like broadcast and whatnot. Of course, it does shared IP-based jails, which is non-VNet. So that's the default on your out-of-box FreeBSD because VNet's not turned on by default. It supports resource limits, and so you can set things like CPU, memory limits, etc. on jails.
Yeah, if you're using 11, you can also do disk I/O limits.
That's right. That's a new feature in 11, which is definitely good stuff. Also supports file system quotas and reservations. So say you have a data set and you could say, I don't want this jail to grow beyond 4 gigs. You can cap it and then give somebody access to it, and you know they can't grow beyond whatever set.
If you're going to put OwnCloud or something or NextCloud or whatever in a jail, you can say, hey, how about you don't take all of my space?
That's right. So it gives you a lot of tools to control that. Of course, it has dedicated ZFS datasets inside jails. That can be a thing. Transparent ZFS snapshot management. It does binary updating of the jails and then differential jail packaging as well. Export and import. I think those are features I actually wrote for IOCage, so cool to see that it lives on here. And of course, many more things. So there's definitely some good stuff going on here with IOCell and of course IOCage. We'll talk more about that down the road for those who are fans of the classic IOCage, what the new one's going to look like. But of course, a couple notes. The program does make extensive use of ZFS for performing jail operations. So a zpool is required. It doesn't have to be your boot pool or your boot device, but you just need to give it some sort of ZFS data set somewhere. This looks actually like a really fresh fork, though. A lot of the files still have IOCage names in it. Not a lot's changed yet. So I think it's a safe guess to say you'll be able to switch between IOCage and IOCell with relative ease. So if you want to try one out or go back and forth between the two, I don't see anything yet that looks like it would break functionality doing that.
Right, but this fork seems to be about preserving the classic experience as IOCage continues to move on and change.
Correct. So I don't assume yet at the moment that they're going to change all of a sudden and break your old jails. I think that's the plan going forward. Okay, so next up, we've actually, I've been using fail2ban in PCBSD before. It's really nice due to its ability to detect and, of course, block brute force attempts for a variety of services, not just SSH, but things like mail and other things. But it can even work to detect jail brute force attempts, blocking IPs on the host firewall. That's how I had it set up.
I used a number of different tools like deny-host and SSH guard before, but at one point I needed to protect an asterisk server. And fail2ban was the only one I found that had a pre-built profile that matched the log entries for that.
Yeah,
And
it understood how to read asterisk logs. That's always the big thing it comes down to, is how do I read that log file?
Well, because you can write your own regex, but then there's always going to be an edge case you're going to miss or something.
Yeah, you never get
a proper one
right.
always does better.
That's right. So, however, we've always talked about this on FreeBSD. So what about OpenBSD users? Well, today we have a story here where Gordon Turner comes to the rescue for us. He gives us a great write-up on deploying fail-to-ban specifically for that platform. So now, of course, fail-to-ban is a Python program. So you're going to need to install Python first on your OpenBSD box. And then, of course, he provides instructions on how to manually grab the fail-to-ban sources and install it in OpenBSD. I guess they don't have it in the package tree yet. So maybe at some point that'll get added and those steps will go away. But in the meantime, you can still run with it. It's not a deal breaker. So, but then helpfully, Gordon gives us some handy links to scripts and modifications to get fail-to-ban running via run control as well. So like their service files and stuff, which is handy since you're not installing it via package. He does note that they're a little bit different than traditional service files because fail-to-ban both has a server and client that must be run together. So he does some trickery there that makes it all work. So just copy and paste those bits if you don't really care to know the details. But of course, with the installation bits out of the way, we actually get to hit the fun stuff now, which comes in the way of we do SSH brute force detection as the example he's showing us here. So naturally, we'll be configuring fail-to-ban to use PF. I mean, since we're running OpenBSD to do the actual blocking, but the examples shown give us full control over the knobs that you can use to not only detect, brute force attempts, but ultimately call PFCTL to do the heavy lifting and so forth. So definitely good stuff, and you can tweak and tune it to your liking. The last bits of the article, he gives us a little bit of a run through on how you prime PF with the correct block tables and, of course, performing some of the basic administrative tasks to control fail-to-ban in production. So actually how to take care of it after the fact. But really a great article. If you run an OpenBSD box exposed to the internet, you may want to bookmark this one, come back to it, take a little time, set this up. I know I've used also SSH guard and it fail-to-ban a variety of different services, and fail-to-ban's pretty robust. So could do a lot of things, and I'd recommend folks take a look at that, especially if you're not running anything yet. You probably want to get something set up here soon. Mm-hmm. Okay, so time for our next sponsor this week, which is IX Systems. So I'll let Alan tell us a little bit about that now.
Yeah, I guess the best way I can explain why you should use IX Systems is talking about the experience I just finished having with them. We needed some more servers, and they needed to be shipped directly to 4 different data centers, all in the US, and I live in Canada.
Makes it hard.
And so I was never going to see these boxes. So not only did I need a hardware provider that I was going to trust to, give me an accurate quote on what it was going to cost for the servers, build the servers, know that, they're going to work when they get to the data center, because, IX does a burn-in process for 3 days on the servers to make sure, because, most hard drives are going to die in the first 48 hours of being powered on. So they run it for 72 hours and make sure that's not going to be a problem. And they actually do, you get this questionnaire, you fill it out, and they set up the server for you. I needed them to install the OS specifically the way I wanted, partition the disks the way I wanted, and set up the file system and so on. Set the IP addresses, configure the management interface. All of that stuff had to be done a specific way. I needed them, the co-location in New York's like, you have to put this label on your server or it's not, we'll have a bad time. So, someone at IX had to, get a label maker and put this label on my server and everything and get them just right. And, our customers, depending on those getting there, quickly. So it's like, all right, when IX gives me a deadline saying, we'll ship it by this date and, we're using FedEx who will guarantee they'll deliver it by this date, I could rest easy knowing that I could go away to a conference actually hosted by them, but, not necessarily, I've had other times, I've gone to Europe while I had an order pending with them. And knowing that, I wasn't going to have to think about it and worry even, that they were going to run into some problem and not be able to solve it. I knew that I could just relax and know that, when it came to be today, I would, or yesterday actually, I would get emails from each of the co-locations say, yeah, your server arrived and we racked it up and hooked it up and it's all ready to go. And it was just, no frustration.
That's the IX Systems touch, that white glove service where they just take care of it, start to finish.
It's like, even had them go to the point of putting a little marker on it so that when it got to the data center, the tech knew which of the Ethernet ports to plug the cable into. Just a little sticker pointing at the one that's like, because, sometimes it makes a difference.
Don't leave anything to chance.
You never know what the guy at the random data center is going to do. So
that's right. Could have been his first day. You don't know.
Yeah, well, most people probably want the very first NIC plugged in. But, if you want to make sure you're not exposing that management interface to the internet, you actually want to use the other NIC because then it's just not hooked up that way. And, so just a little sticker or whatever pointing saying, hey, make sure you plug in this Ethernet port or labeling them so this one's for this thing and this one's for this thing. That makes a big difference.
Very good. Well, yeah, you can have that today as well. Just go to ixsystems.com/BSD Now, put in the contact details, get in touch with their sales engineers, tell them what you're looking for, and they'll make sure your next server or storage buying experience goes super
even when
smooth,
it's,
just as Alan's been telling us.
Whether it's asking for something they've done 1,000 times before or asking them to do something they've never done before, either way, they're right there working with me and doing it.
We like a challenge, so give them something new. Citing new things, and then we get to show pictures of it usually on BSD Now too, because that's a lot of fun.
No pictures of these ones because they never came to my house.
Oh, bummer. Wow, they didn't ship in your house. You didn't throw them in a pickup truck and drive them across the border. I can see how that would have gotten.
Yeah, actually, Rod Grimes received my one for Portland because Dexter wasn't home.
Nice. Well, very cool. How many people can say they've had Rod Grimes get their server for? Okay, well, let's move up to the rest of the roundup here. So next up, we have, continuing with some of our OpenBSD news for the week, we have a new blog post by Ted Yu, which we talked about something earlier he posted as well. But specifically, this one's just a bunch of notes on things that have changed over there as of late in the OpenBSD land. So I got a list of some of the notables he went through here, and there's a lot more. So feel free to take a look at the article. But he talks a little about some of the EM device driver stuff with MCL 2K2 pools. He says the details are in the commits, but the short story is due to hardware limitations, a number of trade-offs need to be made between performance and memory usage. The EM chip can mostly only be programmed to write to 2K buffers. However, Ethernet payloads are not nicely aligned. They're 2 bytes off. So that leads to a costly choice. Provide a 2K buffer and then copy all the data after the fact, which is slow, or allocate a larger than 2K buffer and provide them with a pointer that's 2 bytes offset. He said previously the next size up from 2K was 4K, which is quite wasteful. He said the new 2K2 buffer still wastes a bit of memory, but much less. So that's cool.
He making a buffer size that was just that little bit more to fit that instead of having to use a whole 4K buffer for 2K of information and a little bit of padding.
Well, just all the extra operations associated with that. And when you're doing it so many times, that's very costly. Let's see. So he has links to all the commits here too, by the way. So if you want to actually see some of the more details on the commits, take a look. But he says FreeType 2.7 is now prettier than ever. So apparently that got some love. He mentions that VMM, which is like their Beehive equivalent, now is available for i386. Improves security as well. He says VMM is still running with a phenomenal set of privileges. So he says, but perhaps some cross-VM attacks may be limited. He said on the other side of the world, Hyper-V support's getting a lot better for OpenBSD as well. He said another thing that happened was they removed set locale. He says set locale was sprinkled throughout the code base many years ago, even though it did nothing. He said in anticipation of the day when it would do something. Well, we've since decided that day will never come, and so many set locale calls can now go. So they've gone ahead and pruned those out. He says syspatch is coming. He said lots of commits, actually. He says despite the name, it's more like a system update since it replaces entire binaries. Then again, replacing a few binaries in a system is like patching small parts of the whole. He said a syspatch update will be smaller than an entire release. Okay,
interesting
cool.
They didn't decide to do binary diffs of some kind to make them smaller.
Yeah. Just update the individual files that change, which is still smaller than the whole distro files, I'm sure.
Replacing just the files that change is basically what the package-based version of FreeBSD will do. And, I was like, oh, that seems fine. But then apparently there are quite a few people using FreeBSD over like dial-up or wireless connections that are really slow and very bandwidth constrained. And the fact that FreeBSD Update is doing just binary diffs actually is the only way they can get the updates.
Sure.
So... it's interesting to see
another challenge.
Yeah.
He also mentions, though, they're working on a new build system. He said it kind of works like before, but a lot of details have changed to support less root. He said actually it'd be accurate to say the whole build privilege system has been flipped. Start as root, which then drops down to the build user to do the heavy lifting, instead of starting as a user, which can elevate to root at any time. He said this no longer requires the build user to be pseudo root. In fact, the goal is that the build user can't elevate at all. So that's a good one. That's neat to see. But of course, check out the article. There's a few other things scattered throughout there, and of course the links to everything. So take a look, and if you want to see any more about these topics, of course, maybe Bugted, maybe he'll write a little bit more about them, and we'll cover them on a future episode.
I have some stuff in here about stack locking for the network stack locking, and a bunch of other interesting things. Whatever you're interested in is definitely in there.
Yep. Okay, so this next one's a fun one, actually. I almost wanted to just read the whole article live on the air, but I don't think we can do all that.
No,
but
a little bit of time.
Anyway, it comes well, we'll do some of it. He said it comes a little late for a Halloween episode, of course, but it came from Bell Labs as a fascinating article talking about the successor to Unix, Plan 9. And so I'll read you through some big parts of the article here. But there was once an operating system that was intended to be the successor to Unix. Plan 9 from Bell Labs was its name. And playing with it for 5 minutes is like visiting an alternate dimension where computers are done differently. It was so ahead of its time that it would be considered cutting edge even today. Find out the weird and woolly history to Plan 9's inception and eventual consignment as a footnote of operating systems today. Interesting. So maybe you've heard about this before, or maybe you haven't, but how exactly did Plan 9 differ from the Unix that we're all know and are used to using today? So a couple things that I pulled out here. Here's the list, some of the key features under Plan 9's hood. First of all, so 9P, which is the distributed file system protocol. Everything runs through this. There is no escaping it. Since everything runs on top of 9P, that makes everything running on a Plan 9 box distributed as well. That means you can import dev audio from another machine on the network to use its sound card when your machine doesn't have one. Oh, interesting idea. NDB, the namespace server. In conjunction with 9P, it bosses all the programs around and forces them to comply with the Plan 9 way. Okay? Instead of Unix sockets, all the networking just runs through 9P. Thus, everything from Ethernet packets to network cards are just all one more kind of file. Mind-blowing and weird. I don't know how I would like that. He says, while Unicode is implemented ad hoc in other systems, it's baked into Plan 9 from the very first int main. In fact, even users who don't like Plan 9 have to admit that the character encoding support, together with the beautiful built-in Rio font, makes every other operating system look primitive. He says the system's own internal programs are built to be a rounded set of user tools from the ground up. So, for instance, it comes with its own editor, Acme, built to be its own weird morphing thing that plays nice with the 9P protocol. Interesting. Sounds neat, but did this actually ever work in the real world? So it's the result, they say here, was a mixture of both breathtaking efficiency and alienating otherworldliness. Trying out the system is like a visit to an alternate reality where time-traveling gremlins changed how computers are made and used. You can execute any command anywhere just by typing its name and middle-clicking on it, even in the middle of reading a file. You can type out your blog post in the middle of a man page and save it right there. Screenshots are made by pointing /dev/screen to a file. When you execute a program in a terminal, the terminal morphs into the program you launched instead of just running into the background. The window manager Rio can be evoked within Rio to create an instance of itself running inside itself. You can keep going like that until, like Inception, you get lost in which layer you're in. Get used to running Plan 9 long enough, and you'll find yourself horribly ill-adapted for dealing with the normal world. He says, it goes on, though, while systems administrators couldn't stop praising it, the average home user won't see much benefit unless they happen to run about 8 desktop machines scattered all over. But to quote the legendary hacker tribal bard Eric S. Raymond, Plan 9 failed simply because it fell short of being a compelling enough improvement on Unix to displace its ancestor. So I guess neat ideas, but not enough to make people make this huge of a jump.
But I've seen lots of projects to pull each individual piece of Plan 9 into regular Unix separately.
I wonder if at some point that's what will happen. We'll say 20, 30 years from now, all these Plan 9 things will finally be realized on Unix, and then we'll look back and go, oh, Plan 9 already had that. We finally arrived at where they wanted us to be.
Because I think it's 9P is being proposed as a solution for sharing stuff between a host and a VM.
That's right. That's right. That's what I think they're using in the new FreeNAS as well. But interesting stuff. A fascinating article, worth your time to read through. There's a lot of good stuff. I mean, I just kind of cherry pick some of the best things here. But take a look at the nice alternate dimension that could have been. It's definitely a fascinating look. I wonder if you can find and run a full Plan 9 right now. What's a distro or what would you install if you wanted to play with that?
Something at some point, but I think the original Bell Labs pages are gone now. I don't know exactly what's going on.
Well, maybe somebody in the chat room will know. We'll point us to the link.
There's somebody in the chat room whose nickname is Plan 9, which I'm guessing means they're a big fan.
Okay. Well, hopefully they know then. Otherwise, we're going to make you change your nickname because you can't go making that kind of claim if you don't know where it is. Anyway, good stuff. Check out the article. Definitely a fascinating read. Okay, time to head over to the Beastie bits. So we got quite a few things to get to, which we'll get started with. So, gosh, Ted, he might as well just write a lot of the show notes now. I think we've borrowed from him 3 times today. But what's his new thing he's got going on, Alan?
He's made a new web service called Inks, which is, links as a service. He said, so Inks is links as a service without the L for loser. Basically, it's like Reddit or Hacker News, but without the disagreeable trolls and the military-industrial complex shills downvoting everything to hide the truth.
Or when I looked at it, I thought it was just an RSS feed type thing.
Yeah,
listed
I'm
stuff.
not sure how it's maintained, if other people suggest things or if it's just his or what. Because otherwise, it's like I have something like the bookmarking service I use to collect the links that become the show notes for TechSnap. It's like people could have that as a feed. It's like these are the things Alan's reading this week. But anyway, a lot of them look pretty interesting. The top one right now is hacking the web via WordPress's auto update feature. Like a lock-free many producer single consumer pattern of work queues where the last one always wins, and security for the high-risk user. A lot of very good reading linked on here. So.
Okay, well, good stuff. Well, again, Ted, awesome work. Keep providing us more inks. Okay, so what's this next one? Pam is an Un-American Talk is now online. Oh, that sounds very fascinating.
So this is from the Michigan user group, Michael Lucas. Michael W. Lucas giving his talk, Pam is Un-American.
Which related to that, we have his blog post now where he's talking about advertising for Pam Mastery and how he had tried Reddit advertising at one point, which led to some interesting results. I guess he said maybe he can attribute one book sale.
But he said sales overall were down during that period, and they've since come back after, the thing in the U.S. happened.
So I would suggest you need more data to draw definitive conclusions, just because, like you said, you need to do it several times.
But yes, he says in particular overall that he's also, not an advertising creative person. And looking at his advertisement, it was just a large picture of the cover, which is kind of interesting, but maybe doesn't quite sell it the way you need to on Reddit.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, next up, we have Michael Dexter has written a status report, or a NetBSD report, actually, how the conference went. That got posted over at IX Systems website, and there's a bunch of pictures there. Oh, no, I'm on there. Crap. Okay, well, anyway. What is that face I'm making? That was a horrible picture. Anyway, there's a bunch of pictures on there and stuff. Oh, there's Alan there in the ZFS panel they did. Good stuff. So definitely check it out in case you couldn't make it out. You see the picture now? I know, like I have my face all scrunched up or something. You must have taken it, like
something to spell good or something. I don't know.
I don't know, right? Yes, always flattering photos at these kind of conferences. But anywho, go check it out if you didn't get to come out to NetBSD and kind of want to hear a little bit of a eye view of somebody who was there, what it was like. If you didn't hear Alan and me talk about it and want to read some more, take a look. Maybe it'll encourage you to come out next year.
I liked Matt Aaron's talk where he was mentioning specifically, when you want to add more storage, ZFS tries to make it as much like adding more RAM, right? When you add more RAM to your machine, you don't have to run RAM admin and try to manage it. It's just, oh, look, I have more memory. Yay. And that's the idea with ZFS storage. You throw in some more disks and, you add them to the pool and you don't have to do anything. You don't have to migrate file systems and you don't have to try to, do anything. It's just, hey, look, storage. I can use that.
Okay. Very cool. And then lastly, for the BSD bits here, we have a bunch of various CBSD tutorials, which I've never played with CBSD at all, but this looks interesting. There's a bunch of videos you can watch here to kind of see how you would run it and set it up.
A different jail management framework, but I think it does a bit more. I think you can do Beehive as well or something. And
I think so. That sounds familiar.
I've not had a chance to look at it.
Yeah, I have to take a look at it at some point. But anyway, if you're curious and want to see, in a very quick, painless way what it does without actually deploying something, take a look at the videos here. Hopefully it'll give you some inspiration.
Good head start anyway.
Yep. Okay, well, so we need to get to our last sponsor for the week, which is going to be Tarsnap. So, of course, website for that, tarsnap.com/BSD Now is where you want to go ahead and check it out today. And need to start doing your backups right away. If you're not doing any backups at all, first of all, shame on you. You should be doing some backups. Yes. But if you're going to do them properly into the cloud, you need to do it the Tarsnap way, which is backups which are 100% encrypted, both at your server before it leaves the wire. So anything that's stored up in the cloud is encrypted at that point with a key that only you have access to. So you don't have to worry about somebody on the remote side, peeking at your data or leaking it, or government entities taking a look at pretty much anything, right? As long as you control the key, you're in good shape. And of course, Tarsnap makes some amazing claims about that, but then they back it up by releasing their source code. So you can go take a look at it yourself. You can compile it yourself if you like, which is really cool. You don't even have to trust the binaries provided by your operating system of choice, which is really cool. Again, I don't know of any other backup software that lets you do that, but you'll want to check it out today. Make an account. Once you get your account created, put a few bucks in there. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, especially if you're backing up data that's not changing a lot. Since it's only sending the diffs up to the cloud, you're not actually paying for a lot of extra data. I mean, I think I put in $20 2 years ago, and it's still going strong. I think it's still like $15 left or something.
Yes, right? I get my bill for like 10 cents a month, and I'm like, oh, I should back up even more.
Yep. But anyway, it's good stuff. So check it out today. Definitely should be getting set up. And if you talk to Colin, or I don't know how many people. Does he have other people on staff now?
His brother works there, Graham.
Okay. Well, if you talk to Colin or Graham, tell them you heard about it here on BSD Now, because we love Colin's work, and it's definitely good stuff, and we hope you enjoy it as well. Okay, so time for feedback and questions here. So we have Dylan writes in. He says, "Dear Alan and Chris, first of all, thank you for putting all the hard work into BSD Now episodes to get them out to us so regularly. I enjoy watching them. I'm based in Hong Kong and Macau, and have used FreeBSD for most of my server needs since 1999.
Yes, that's longer than me.
I know, right? That's been around a while. He said, I've recently started a new project involving paid videos for corporate training. We're running a web front end on a FreeBSD box, but our video server, which delivers the videos to paying customers after they log in, is Kaltura on CentOS. I'm not familiar with that. Are you, Alan?
I know a little bit about it, but not much.
Okay. He said, this is because, try as they may, our developers can't find a good video server solution for BSD. Do you know of one? He says, Kaltura is clunky and often frustrating because it handles everything from subtitles to video watermarking to player size to encoding. He said, if possible, I'd rather move everything to FreeBSD. For starters, I want ZFS on the video server boxes. Yeah. He said, do you know if anyone's ever worked on a Kaltura port for FreeBSD, or are there better alternatives out there you know of? He says, of course, Netflix runs FreeBSD after all, but I'm not sure exactly how. Well, I don't think they're doing watermarking and all that.
With Netflix, they get the videos delivered already encrypted by the studios, and they just distribute them that way. Wowza, which is a commercial video server software, is Java-based, and we run it on FreeBSD on hundreds of machines. It works well, but it only deals with, sending the videos out to the user. It doesn't do stuff like watermarking, indexing, I don't know, subtitles. Well, it can do subtitles, but it doesn't make the subtitles. It just can send the subtitles with the video. It can do watermarking, but it does it in real time. Like, it actually transcodes the video and throws the watermark on as the video is streaming out. And I think that only works for live streams. I don't think you'd normally do that for video on demand. It can do multi-bit rate, but you don't really manage the player size. You do that more on the front end. And then encoding, it does multiple protocols, so it can do like HLS and RTMP and a couple in MPEG-, but all of them are just sending the regular H.264 video, not actually changing the format. So some of what you want can be done with software that runs on FreeBSD, but some of it is, I can't imagine Kaltura is doing all that much that's really Linux specific, so it might be possible to port it. I just don't know that demand for that is high enough.
Interesting. Okay, well, if anybody else in the audience has some alternatives.
Chat room says that they think Kaltura actually uses Wowza to do the video serving part of it. It's just all the extra stuff on top of it.
Sure. So maybe it's just driving Wowza around.
It sounds like it can likely be ported to FreeBSD.
Okay.
Put in a request. If you want to go completely free, Nginx has relatively good support for RTMP and HLS now, where you can point it to a directory full of MP4 files and it can automatically do the HLS segmentation and all that kind of stuff. But again, that doesn't really help you with the watermarking. But,
sure.
If you really need to do the work, you can do that with FFmpeg or whatever, which is all Kaltura is really doing. It's just providing a nicer interface to it.
They wrap it for you. So you need like your IO cage front end to FFmpeg or whatever, right?
It's the story of the BSDs. It's like we have all the functionality. It's just nobody's actually made the
putting the tooling in front of it. That's how I feel a lot about like things like Docker. I feel like they have a lot of the basic same concepts and functionality, but
Docker's
just
really the other way around. They have a nice, pretty front end and a back end that doesn't work versus channels, which are the other way around.
Anyway, forever the BSD thing. Okay, well, let's move on here. So we got Scott next. He says, hey, I hope this actually gets to you, given that my questions back in May apparently went into the Bitbucket. Sorry about that. Sometimes we don't get to all of them, so I should put that out there up front.
Relegated to a spam bin and didn't get reclaimed. Yeah. Sorry about that.
It happens. And we do get a lot of comments. So some weeks we have to pick and choose like which ones we're going to put on the air. So anyway, but he says, please pass along the following thoughts to the person whose question you read in episode 164 is concerned about running ZFS on systems with limited, in the recent sense of the term, memory. So he has a bunch of pointers here, which we'll pass along. So of course, avoid deduplication. He said that's the main thing in ZFS that needs the whole bunch of extra memory for 1 gig per 1 terabyte of direct access storage. Say we kind of skip that because that's pretty obvious. But he said also there's some sysctl variables you might twiddle to see whether they can help. So of course on FreeBSD the VM KMM size max.
That usually you would only have to change on i386.
Yes. Yeah, and then the other one, the one that I said, is the arcmax. So that's an important one. You set that in loader.com.
Well, in particular, starting with FreeBSD 11.0, you can adjust that at runtime while the system is running. That makes a big difference. Really nice. It's like
that helps a lot.
I need some more of my memory back from ZFS. Let me just shrink the arcmax. Or I'm done running that VM. Let me send it back up.
I forget. Does it kick it out immediately, or is it a slow thing? Okay. Well, that's very cool. Very cool. So that's a good one. So like on TrueOS, for example, we set that ahead of time. I think based on the amount of memory you have, we set some defaults there, like 512 or 128 if you're on really low memory.
You set it quite low, whereas the default is like 95% of all of your RAM, which only makes sense on a file server. So it's
we found too many desktops where it's like even if I had 4 gigs of memory or 8 gigs, it's like still using up way too much RAM.
Well, especially if you're going to start running a VM that's going to take quite a few of the gigs, then it's like fighting with ZFS constantly.
Yeah. Another one he suggests, of course, is ZFS prefetch disable. So he said you can tweak that. He says the default is 1 unless the system's memory exceeds 4 gigs and must be set at boot time like the two above. He says leave disabled.
Disabled can
not
be
anymore.
Tuned at runtime for a long time. I don't think that one requires being set at boot time.
Interesting.
The default is set at boot time based on if you have more than 4 gigs or not. You will get much less performance without prefetch, so you might want to turn it on, but it obviously will use memory as it prefetches data that you may or may not end up using.
Yep. And then, of course, he mentions, let's see, one of the other tips was don't use an L2 ARC. Yes. He said because keeping track of its content eats up some extra RAM in addition to the ARC's requirements.
Yeah,
so
that's the big one people don't seem to get is that it's like, oh, I don't have very much memory, so I'll throw in an L2 ARC to give me a bigger cache. It's like,
that's not free memory.
Every entry in the L2 ARC requires an entry in RAM saying, hey, this data is actually over on the L2 ARC. So yeah, it will actually cause you to cache even less in RAM by having an L2 ARC.
That's right. That's right. So anyway, we appreciate you sending that in, Scott. Of course, it'll be in the show notes if people want to take a look at what Scott wrote in here. And sorry we messed you last time, but hey, you made it this time. So good for you. Keep trying. Okay, so next up we have, hey guys, I understood you were saying one could mix package and ports if on the same state. Can I fix my ports tree to the quarterly one, or do I have to change my package to the current one? If I can fix my ports tree, where would I do that? So a bunch of different ways you can check it out. Go ahead.
One of my things on my to-do list since BSDCan 2015 was teach PortSnap to allow you to have the option to check out the quarterly branch. Never got around to that, but you can just check it out with SVN, and you can have that quarterly branch, and then it will be in line with what's in the quarterly package tree. Or you can continue to use the head support tree and switch your package to the current one. But depending what you want, if you want the latest software all the time, you want to use the current one. But if you want more stability, especially if you're mixing them, it's a little bit easier because the quarterly branch doesn't change as much to just do an SVN checkout of the quarterly branch.
Okay. But of course, if you're going to mix and match, try and keep them in sync. Exactly. And remember, when you do that package upgrade command, it's not going to respect necessarily what came from ports and what didn't.
Is going to be upgraded from the repo. So you might want to lock them, but the locking gets really nasty. Because it doesn't, when it goes to upgrade and it can't because something's locked, it doesn't say that. It's just like, oh, no, there's nothing to do, or I'm not going to touch that.
So if there was one thing I could have that I would love the package to do, so I do build ports occasionally, when I'm doing my port maintaining work, like I have to go build a port and test it and make sure it works, right? But a lot of times, like build dependencies and stuff, I don't necessarily have installed. So when you go type in make on a port, it goes and builds all the build dependencies. It'd be really cool to have a flag that says, okay, any build dependencies or whatever, try and install those via package, not from the port. Yep. So even though I type make on the port, if it would just say, ooh, I'm going to fetch these to do the build for you, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, there's, you could end up with incompatible sets of options there, but not really. I know that, like, was it Port Master or Port Upgrade used to have a feature like that, but it was the old kind of package, so it was useless because they were always a year out of date.
It would be helpful to do that again, because there's just too many little build things where it's like they don't get installed if you install the package via runtime, but it'd be cool. And I already have them all in the package system. It'd be nice if they would just get installed.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I was always, craving that thing Baptiste talked about one time. It's like where currently, like in your package database, if you do package info on a package, you can actually see that it came from ports or if it came from packages. And if package upgrade could be like, hey, that one came from the port, and here's the options that were used. Let me just recompile that port for you. Of course, doesn't actually work quite that easily. But
Sure.
If you really want to mix stuff that much, I would suggest running your own Poudriere and just building it.
True. Yeah, just do everything via package, but build those yourself. All right, so Trenton writes in. He says, hey, I've been listening to the show for the past 2.5 years and really enjoy it. I used to be working with FreeBSD back around the turn of the century, and it's fun to see how much it's changed and remained the same since I left. Your show has helped rekindle the fun I had cutting my teeth on it during my computer science education and in my first job. Well done, and thanks to everyone involved in the show. Well, we appreciate it. He said, but first I have a comment and a question. He said, first, in the last episode, you had a question about using ports and packages, and you lamented the lack of a good tool for building configure ports and using packages. He said, as far as I know, Synth does this, which is in the ports management branch. But he said you need to have your ports tree branch and package repo lined up. It requires more knowledge about the port and package system than maybe a normal user would want, but it seems possible. Of course, I can only attest to this in practice because I only understood this after trying to build a 64-bit Linux base and realized everything was out of sync, but not really wanting to destroy a good working system. I imagine someday I'll create a boot environment and blow away all my packages to see how well this really works. So yeah, you could use Synth or Poudriere. I mean, those are kind of the two things at the moment.
I think it does. So I think Synth might actually be able to pull dependencies from the package repo and only build the thing you're trying to build.
I think it might, yeah. It may do that.
We just thank you for answering the previous question for us.
Right, that may fix it. So, okay. Well, I'll have to give that another whirl then next time I do that. Okay, and he said, next I'm having a problem using dtrace on a PCBSD 10.3 box, and he mentions it's installed on a Lenovo T420 and using Jelly encryption. He said the dtrace command runs okay, but any script I run, even hello world, returns this error. And then he's got some io.d line 43 operator. Cannot be applied to a forward declaration, no struct, devstat definition available. He said, I've pulled my hair out trying to find an answer, and the closest thing I can find is a bug report to FreeBSD that claimed it was an issue with the grub not filling in some paths correctly, which I believe that actually is the case. I recall seeing that as well a while back. But he said, though reports claim this was fixed, it doesn't seem to work for me. He said, you probably just want me to upgrade to TrueOS, but I don't have a clear upgrade path because of Jelly. He said, I'm not afraid to dig and get my hands dirty, but honestly, I don't know where to start. My original goal for running dtrace was just to run the scripts from the tuning chapter, the Advanced CFS Mastery book, just so I could experiment with tuning. Anyway, I figured you two may have some pointers. Thanks again for the great work and best regards. So let me take a look at that bug, or if you had sent here, just to see if it's the one I'm recalling.
So it seems like it's just the io.d script contains something that doesn't make sense, isn't lined up with one of the .h files or something anymore. So you might try just moving that file out of that directory or something and seeing if it can start without it. It's basically just part of the dtrace standard library that provides a bunch of helper things for your script. But, particularly if you're not trying to use the I/O one, then it'll probably solve your problem.
Interesting. Somebody else said they saw a similar problem on a Beehive VM they created using the FreeBSD snapshots, not PCBSD. He said just rebuilding the kernels when this started happening.
Well, if you saw a newer kernel, then you have base, then that might do it. But
yeah, he was saying he's on 11.0. So I wonder if something's just out of sync between the base and the world. I mean, if worse comes to worse, you could possibly go ahead and just rebuild all of world and kernel. You can check out the sources from the PCBSD repo if you like and just rebuild from scratch to make sure you're in a 100% consistent state if something's gotten out of sync. The grub issue was more of an issue, I think, setting the kernel path, if I recall. I don't know if it's in this bug, but it would set the kernel to just kernel, and the FreeBSD bootloader would set it to boot kernel. Mm-hmm. And that caused some weirdness with the way dtrace loaded and looked for things, which, again, this was a couple years back, so memory's a little fuzzy on it. But I believe the fix was we just set that variable properly in grub, and the fix worked, and it started working for us anyway, because we had some folks at IX using it as well, and I seem to recall that was fixed. Yeah, Josh Petzel even commented on this here that the grub fix worked for them. So maybe you're running into something different here. But yeah, I would try rebuilding
But yeah, it looks like there's somebody seeing the same thing in the TCP/IO.d as well. I would suggest somebody else earlier in the ticket mentions just renaming or moving that file out of the way temporarily, and it seems to let them move forward as long as they don't depend on one of the helper functions from those, which you won't unless you're using some of the pre-written dtrace scripts.
Yeah, and the bug that we had seen on PCBSD, we did push out a grub update for. So if you're on the latest 10.3 with the latest grub, you should have whatever our fix was at the time. It's not like we went back and reverted
January
that.
2015, so...
Yeah, it's been around for a while now. So, that's the best I can offer. I mean, if you find any more info on it, though, let us know. But on TrueOS, honestly, I haven't really played with it yet. But we're using the BSD loader again, so I know we could rule grub out.
I'm still getting reports. Now. When are you going to do the next roll of that?
What, the loader?
Of just the next version of TrueOS.
The ISO? So we're getting ready to push a set of packages out to an Edge repo now that has the whole OpenRC conversion in it. And we're probably going to be another week or two before we can officially push that to production.
The problem with the Gelly boot stuff caused by a change from the linker, and that's been resolved in head for a little while now.
A couple of weeks now, okay.
Yeah, maybe even almost a month.
Maybe
like
longer.
That.
Well, we've been working on the OpenRC stuff for almost a month, so we are a little bit behind on pushing out some new stuff, which I apologize for. But the OpenRC conversion is a lot of work. So
lots of people complaining that the Gelly boot is broken. It's like, actually, we fixed it.
But we fixed it. And I've even been looking at Eric McCorkle's work. I guess the EFI Jelly boot is a thing. I haven't seen his patches up on Fabric yet.
They are? It's been up there for a long time. It's buried in there, but he recently updated
maybe it's buried.
He's going to... He's just earlier this week said that he has free time and is going to be working on it again. Because I know
maybe if you know where the link is, send me that. I need to search for it. I guess I had looked a couple days ago and didn't see it.
Because he doesn't have a username, so his email address is weird. It's like
okay. Okay, but anyway, that I'm hoping to get that in soon too, because we had somebody else mention that they didn't want to use Scrub anymore, and I was like, well, if you're using UEFI boot, that's the only thing we have at the moment.
Yeah, because it was George Neville Neal wanted to Gelly encrypt his whole laptop before his trip to China, but his laptop has an NVMe, so it can only boot EFI.
Yeah, correct. So a lot of us need this, so I assume it's coming soon. Yeah, if I find that patch, I may actually pull that in early, Alan, so we can test that out as well, because I know we've had reports people want to get off Grub, but for reasons like this and others. Okay, so next up we have Ivan who writes in. He says, hello, Alan and Chris. I've been working on a little script to help me with site backups. Since site files don't change often, I thought of using ZFS and its snapshot feature as a destination combination for site backups. He said, what I plan to do is back up the files to that remote ZFS location and then create ZFS snapshots with his command, which has a backup at date and timestamp. He said, every time new data backs up, it should overwrite the existing data and the new snapshot will be created. That should, at least in theory, save huge amounts of space versus backing up the same data over and over, since snapshots are just deltas, right? He said, but I'm not exactly sure on how I should approach file restores, so I really could use some advice from Mr. ZFS, aka Alan. And then he has some commands here where he's showing how he runs ZFS rollback and getting some errors. And said maybe I should use ZFS then and pipe it.
When you do a rollback, it's permanently going back in time. So any snapshots between where you are now and where you want to roll back to have to be destroyed. You maybe don't want to do that. If you just want to restore individual files, you can either use, there's a hidden .zfs directory in the root of each ZFS file system, which then contains a subdirectory called snapshots, which then contains a directory for each of your snapshots, which then contains the entire file system as it appeared at that time. Or you can actually do mount -t ZFS, then the dataset name, so like, pool name / whatever at snapshot, and then some directory like /mnt, and it'll mount that snapshot read-only at that directory, and you can go in there and copy the individual files. If you want to restore 3 files, you don't have to roll back the entire file system. Little tip, I saw that you have the date format for your snapshot name. I tend to now at least put a little bit of the host name in the snapshot as well, because I had a problem where 2 machines were taking snapshots of the data set every 15 minutes, and I thought they were replicating and they weren't, because it's like, oh, look, the snapshots were the same name, and the replication wasn't working. It was like, that's not the same snapshot. And eventually I figured out, the receiving side was creating a snapshot at the same time with the same name, but it wasn't the same snapshot.
Oh, that could get you in a bad situation if you didn't catch that.
Yep, it was. I was so confused. I was like, "What is happening? How is this not the same snapshot? It's got the right name and everything." Yeah.
Yeah, you almost need to put like the host name in the snapshot name.
I've started doing
right?
So that I could tell which side is making the snapshot.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that happened. It was actually the PCBSD package repo stuff when I was moving it around a bit.
Oh.
So on all the edges, it's mounted under pool name /m for mirror. And I had it as the same name on the source. And it meant that the snapshot thing was happening on 2 different servers that were snapshotting everything. And eventually I changed it so that when it's the source, it's pool name /s/PCBSD /PKG or whatever. So that snapshotting only ever happens on the S dataset, never the M dataset, because the M dataset is always going to be receiving remote copies. But yes,
I wonder how many people are maybe checking in their pools right now, because maybe they do something similar and they're like, holy crap, I never thought
putting the host name, or at least part of it, or something unique ahead of the date in the snapshot name is very useful. It's like, all of mine just had the keyword auto and then the date. And I was like, well, I could just change auto to, PDX 1-01 and problem solved. Never going to get confused ever again.
Pro tips from Mr. ZFS, Alan G.
Yeah.
So, good stuff. That's why people come back, Alan. It's good stuff. Okay, so that was actually our last comment for the week, or feedback section. So we got to remind you as we wrap up the show here, of course, if you have other things you want to send in to us, so maybe you have a question, a comment, show idea, topic, or maybe some story you want to hear about mentioned on the show, send it to feedback@bsdnow.tv. We can't promise we'll get everything on the air, but we do try, and we have quite a backlog right now. So be patient. We're working through it and trying to get everybody their fair chance on the show here. So keep sending stuff in there. You can contact via Twitter and other things. Doesn't mean we'll see it, but if you really want me, Alan, and JT to see it, please send it to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we'll look forward to being back same time next week with a new episode.